The sky was painted with layers of gray, thunder rolling in the distance as if the heavens themselves were angry. The small town of Wharton, Texas, located just an hour outside of Houston, braced itself for what was forecasted to be the most severe storm of the year. The streets were empty, the windows of every house shuttered, and the wind had begun to howl with a ferocity that promised destruction. Yet, amidst the chaos brewing in the skies, in an abandoned lot on the outskirts of town, there was a heartbreaking sight, one that would soon unite an entire community in ways no one could have foreseen. She was a dog, a scrappy, golden-coated Labrador mix, barely more than a puppy herself. She had been left behind by her owner months ago, discarded like trash when her belly began to swell with life. For weeks she had scavenged through dumpsters and sought refuge under old sheds, trying to shield her unborn pups from the dangers of the world. When the storm arrived, she had nowhere to go. She was crouched beneath the skeletal remains of an abandoned truck, her golden fur matted with mud and her body shivering from the cold. Huddled close to her were 5 tiny newborns, no more than a day old. They whimpered softly, their fragile bodies pressed against their mothers for warmth. Despite her own hunger and exhaustion, the mother licked each one, her eyes darting around nervously at the growing storm. The lot where they were hiding had once been a bustling used car dealership, but now it was overgrown with weeds, littered with rusted metal and broken glass. It was a place people rarely visited, and the odds of anyone finding the little family in time seemed slim. But this wasn't just the story of a stray dog and her puppies. This was the story of how despair can give way to hope, and how even in the darkest storms, both literal and metaphorical, there is still kindness to be found. A mile away, in a modest ranch-style house, a woman named Lila Garcia sat by her living room window, watching the storm roll in. Lila was a retired nurse, known in town for her kind heart and the way she always seemed to have room for one more stray. Her home was a haven for injured and abandoned animals, and though she lived alone, she was never lonely. Lila had been watching the weather reports all day, feeling a gnawing anxiety she couldn't quite explain. There was something about this storm. It felt more personal, like a call to action. As lightning lit up the sky, she whispered a quiet prayer, asking for strength and guidance, though she wasn't sure for what. Her prayers would soon be answered in the most unexpected way. Meanwhile, at the local animal shelter, 17-year-old Jason Hart was finishing up his shift. Jason had started volunteering at the shelter as part of a community service project, but over the months, it had become his sanctuary. He had always been quiet and a little withdrawn, struggling to find his place in the world. But with the animals, he didn't have to pretend. They didn't judge him for his stutter or the way he avoided eye contact. As Jason cleaned out the last kennel, the shelter director, Mrs. Callahan, walked in with a worried look. "Jason, I'm heading out early to secure my place before the storm hits. You should do the same, okay?" she said. Jason nodded, grabbing his raincoat and stepping outside into the rising wind. As he walked home, Jason thought about his dog, Max, who had been his best friend until he passed away 2 years ago. He missed Max every day, but he hadn't had the courage to adopt another dog since. Max had been there for him during the hardest times in his life, and Jason wasn't sure he could ever love another animal as much. Little did he know the storm was about to lead him to a new purpose and a chance to heal. Back at the abandoned lot, the rain began to pour, heavy and relentless. The mother dog whimpered softly, curling her body tighter around her puppies. She knew instinctively that they wouldn't survive the night if they stayed here. But where could they go? Her body trembled with exhaustion, and her paws were sore from weeks of wandering. Still, she couldn't give up. Not on her babies. As the wind howled and lightning illuminated the lot, she made a decision. She would fight for her family, no matter the cost. This is where their stories begin to intertwine. Lila, Jason, and the stray dog. Each of them was about to be tested in ways they never expected, and each of them would discover that even the smallest acts of compassion could create ripples that change lives. The storm raged on, growing more violent by the hour. Sheets of rain battered the abandoned lot, turning the ground into a slurry of mud. The mother dog, now soaked to the bone, nudged her 5 puppies closer beneath her belly, trying desperately to shield them. But the rusty truck under which they sheltered was no match for the unrelenting wind. With each clap of thunder, the mother flinched, her instincts screaming that she needed to move her babies. But where? She had already risked everything. In the weeks leading up to their birth, she'd wandered into busy streets, scavenged for scraps, and narrowly escaped a pack of stray dogs that had cornered her by a dumpster. She'd been a fighter her whole life, but tonight she was running out of strength. As if sensing her desperation, the smallest of the puppies, a runt with fur as black as midnight, let out a high-pitched whimper. The sound cut through the storm like a plea, raw and fragile. The mother nuzzled him softly, but her heart was heavy. For the first time, she feared she wouldn't be able to protect them. Miles away, Lila sat at her kitchen table, staring out into the storm. The wind had picked up, rattling the old windows of her house. Her own animals, 2 dogs, 3 cats, and a rescued parrot named Charlie, were restless, sensing the tension in the air. Lila's gaze shifted to the leash hanging by the door, a bittersweet reminder of Roscoe, her old Labrador who had passed away last year. He had been her companion for over a decade, a constant source of comfort after her husband passed. She felt his absence keenly tonight. Lila pushed her chair back and walked to the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The storm felt different. It wasn't just the intensity, it was the nagging feeling that someone, or something, needed her. She shook her head, scolding herself for being dramatic, but the unease wouldn't leave her. Then she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible sound between the cracks of thunder. A fowl. At first, Lila thought it was her imagination, but then it came again, louder this time. Her breath caught in her throat. She grabbed a flashlight and her raincoat, ignoring the voice in her head telling her to stay indoors. "Charlie, keep watch for me," she said with a weak smile, and the parrot squawked back as if to protest. But Lila was already out the door, stepping into the storm. At the same time, Jason was trudging home from the shelter. His hood was pulled tight over his head, but it didn't stop the rain from soaking through his jacket. As he passed the edge of town, he noticed a glint of light in the distance. It wasn't a street lamp, nor was it a house. It was coming from the direction of the abandoned lot. Curiosity got the better of him. Jason adjusted his backpack and veered off the sidewalk, heading toward the light. As he got closer, he noticed movement, a golden blur darting beneath the rusted truck. It took him a moment to process what he was seeing. A dog. No, not just a dog with puppies. Jason's heart clenched. The mother was growling low, her body coiled defensively around her litter, but Jason could see the fear in her eyes. Hey, it's okay," he said softly, kneeling down a few feet away. Rain dripped from the brim of his hood and his glasses fogged up with each breath, but he didn't move closer. He didn't want to scare her. For a moment, it seemed like the mother might lunge at him, but then one of the puppies let out a tiny squeak, and her attention shifted. Jason took the opportunity to assess the situation. The puppies were wet, shivering, and vulnerable. They wouldn't last the night out here. But what could he do? He didn't have a car, and even if he did, there was no way the mother would let him take her pups without a fight. Jason pulled out his phone and quickly dialed the only person he could think of, Mrs. Callahan, the shelter director. "Mrs. Callahan, it's Jason. There's a dog. She's got puppies. They're in the abandoned lot off Route 10. I don't know what to do." Mrs. Callahan's voice was firm but kind. "Jason, you need to get out of the storm. I'll call animal control and see if they can send someone out first thing in the morning." "Morning?" Jason's voice cracked. "They won't make it till morning." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Then do what you can," she said softly. Lila's flashlight beam swept across the lot as she approached, her boots sinking into the muddy ground. The howl she'd heard earlier had gone silent, but something told her she was close. And then she saw him. A teenage boy crouched under the edge of a rusted truck, his backpack discarded in the mud. Her eyes followed his gaze to the mother dog and her puppies. "Oh my God," Lila whispered. Jason turned, startled by the light. Who are you?" "I'm Leela. I live nearby," she said quickly, lowering the flashlight. "Are they yours?" Jason shook his head. "No, I found them. I didn't know what to do. They're so small." His voice broke, and Lila could see the helplessness in his expression. Lila took a deep breath, her mind racing. The mother dog wouldn't let them take her puppies easily, but if they didn't act soon, the whole family would succumb to the cold. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly, kneeling beside him. "Do you have anything we can use? A blanket, a towel?" Jason shook his head again. "Just my jacket." Lila glanced at the truck, the rain pouring down harder now. Time was running out. The mother dog growled again as they inched closer, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. But when Lila locked eyes with her, she saw something deeper. Fear, yes, but also desperation. The dog was begging for help, even if she didn't fully trust these strangers. "I know, girl," Lila murmured softly, her voice trembling. "I know you're scared, but we're here to help." The storm roared around them, and the air was thick with tension. Jason and Lila knew that one wrong move could send the mother running, leaving her puppies behind. But they couldn't give up. Not now. The storm showed no mercy. The rain hammered the ground like an endless drumbeat, pooling into deep puddles that threatened to swallow the fragile puppies. The mother dog's growls softened into whimpers as her strength waned, but her instincts refused to let her give up. She shifted her body over her pups, trying to cover them entirely. She was losing heat, trembling violently, but she didn't care about herself, only about them. Jason felt helpless, his hands clenched into fists as the cold seeped through his soaked clothes. He could barely hear Lila over the howling wind, but her calmness, even in the face of such despair, grounded him. She knelt in the mud, her flashlight flickering as water leaked into its casing, and whispered to him urgently, "We have to get them out of here, but we need her to trust us first," Lila said, nodding toward the mother dog. "Jason, do you have any food with you? Anything at all?" Jason rummaged through his backpack, pulling out a slightly squished granola bar. He unwrapped it quickly, breaking it into pieces. "Will this work?" "It's better than nothing," Lila replied. Jason crouched low, extending his hand with a small piece of the granola bar. His heart pounded as the mother dog stared at him, her golden eyes fierce and wary. She growled weakly, her body hovering protectively over her pups, but Jason didn't flinch. "Hey, it's okay, girl," he murmured, his voice shaking. "I'm not gonna hurt you. You're so strong, but you don't have to do this alone." Lila watched with bated breath as Jason inched closer. The boy's tenderness surprised her. There was something raw and genuine in the way he spoke to the dog, and for a moment, the storm seemed to hold its breath. The mother dog hesitated, sniffing the air. Hunger gnawed at her, but her instincts screamed not to trust. Still, the boy didn't back away, his hand steady even as the rain streamed down his face. Slowly, cautiously, the mother reached out, her nose brushing his hand as she took the small offering. Jason exhaled shakily, relief washing over him. "Good girl," he whispered. "She's letting you in," Lila said softly, her voice carrying a note of wonder. But there was no time to celebrate. Another thunderclap shattered the moment, louder and closer this time. The mother dog flinched violently, her body coiling as if ready to bolt. Jason's heart sank. If she ran, her puppies wouldn't survive. "Wait!" Lila called out suddenly, her voice cutting through the chaos. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a scarf, a bright blue one she had knitted years ago. She held it out like a white flag, moving slowly as she approached the mother. "I'm not here to hurt you," Lila said gently. "I just want to help your babies." The mother dog froze, her eyes darting between Lila and Jason. She looked exhausted, her legs trembling beneath her, but something in Lila's voice seemed to reach her. Maybe it was the quiet authority, or maybe it was the warmth behind her words. Whatever it was, the dog didn't run. "She's letting us," Jason said, his voice barely audible over the storm. Lila nodded. "Okay, we have to move fast." Working together, Lila and Jason carefully lifted the puppies, wrapping them in Lila's scarf to keep them warm. Each tiny body felt like a miracle, so small and delicate, yet somehow alive against all odds. The mother dog watched every movement, her growls turning into soft whines as she hovered close, ready to spring into action if she sensed danger. When all 5 puppies were secured, Lila turned her attention to the mother. "Come on, girl," she said, holding out her hand. "We can't leave you behind." The dog hesitated, her instincts warring with her need to stay with her pups. But when Jason stepped forward, holding one of the puppies close to his chest, something shifted. "She won't leave them," Jason said, looking at Lila. "Then let's make sure she knows they're safe," Lila replied. Jason knelt down, holding the puppy out gently. "See? He's okay. We'll keep them all safe. You can trust us." The mother dog took a step forward, then another. Her body was tense, every muscle on edge, but the sight of her puppy in Jason's arms gave her the courage to follow. The trio made their way through the storm, the wind nearly knocking them off balance. Lila led the way, her flashlight flickering as the batteries waned, while Jason carried two of the puppies in his jacket, the mother dog staying close to his side. The other three pups were tucked into Lila's scarf, their tiny cries muffled by the rain. By the time they reached Lila's house, all three of them were soaked and shivering. Lila unlocked the door and ushered everyone inside. The warmth of the house was a stark contrast to the freezing storm outside, and for a moment there was silence as they all caught their breath. The mother dog circled anxiously, checking each of her puppies as Jason and Lila placed them gently on a pile of blankets by the fireplace. The puppies wriggled and whimpered, their cries quieter now that they were out of the cold. "She's still nervous," Jason said, watching as the mother dog paced. "She's been through hell," Lila replied, kneeling beside the makeshift bed. "But she stayed strong for them. She's a survivor." Jason nodded, his gaze softening as he looked at the mother dog. "She's more than that. She's a hero." As the fire crackled to life, the room filled with a sense of fragile hope. The mother dog finally settled beside her puppies, curling her body around them as they nuzzled against her. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held a flicker of trust. Jason sat cross-legged on the floor, his hands resting on his knees. "I didn't think we'd make it," he admitted. Lila smiled at him, her face lined with exhaustion but also pride. "You did good, Jason. You didn't give up, and neither did she." Jason looked down at the smallest puppy, the runt, who had stopped shivering and was now fast asleep. "I think they saved me as much as we saved them." Lila didn't say anything, but her heart swelled. She understood exactly what he meant. The storm raged well into the night, but inside Lila's home there was peace. Fragile, but real. The mother dog lay curled protectively around her puppies, her golden fur catching the soft glow of the firelight. The runt, the smallest of the litter, nestled closest to her chest, letting out tiny, rhythmic breaths. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the little family was safe. But as the storm calmed, a new challenge loomed. The mother dog, though valiantly strong, was clearly unwell. Her body shivered despite the warmth of the fire, her breaths were shallow, and her ribs jutted out from weeks of malnutrition. Lila noticed the faint redness in her eyes and the way she limped slightly when she moved. She had given everything to keep her puppies alive, but now her own body was failing. Lila placed a gentle hand on Jason's shoulder, who was sitting on the floor beside the dogs. "She needs a vet," she said quietly. Jason looked up, alarm flashing in his eyes. "You mean, right now?" Lila nodded. "Her puppies might be okay for now, but she's not. If we don't act soon, she won't make it." Jason's heart twisted painfully at the thought. He had grown attached to the brave dog in the short hours he'd known her. She was a fighter, a protector, and seeing her like this, so vulnerable, made him feel helpless all over again. "But it's the middle of the night," he said, "and the roads are flooded. What can we do?" Lila stood up, her face set with determination. "I know someone, Dr. Patel. He's the town's vet, and he owes me a favor. Let me call him." It took 3 tries for the phone to connect. On the other end of the line, Dr. Patel's groggy voice answered. He was reluctant at first, grumbling about the late hour and the storm, but when Lila explained the situation, his tone softened. "Bring her in," he said finally. "I'll meet you at the clinic." "Thank you, Sam," Lila said, her voice filled with relief. She hung up and turned to Jason. "I'll need your help to get her into the car. She might not let me do it alone." Jason nodded, swallowing his nerves. "Okay, let's do it." The mother dog growled low when they approached her, her instincts flaring up again. Jason crouched down slowly, meeting her eyes. "It's okay, girl," he said softly, his voice steady. "We're going to help you, I promise." She didn't growl this time, but her body was tense as Jason slipped his arms under her. She was surprisingly light, far too light for a dog her size. He could feel every rib beneath her fur. As he carried her to Lila's car, she didn't fight him. She was too weak to resist anymore. The puppies, wrapped in a blanket, were placed in a small basket on the back seat. The mother dog, though hesitant, relaxed slightly when she saw them close by. Jason sat in the back with her, his hand resting gently on her side as Leela drove through the flooded streets. The veterinary clinic was a small, brick building tucked behind the town's main square. Dr. Patel was already waiting by the door when they arrived, his raincoat pulled tightly around him. He ushered them inside quickly, shaking the rain from his hair. "Let's get her on the table," he said, leading them into the examination room. The mother dog whined softly as Jason and Lila lifted her onto the table. Dr. Patel worked quickly, his experienced hands checking her vitals, her gums, her temperature. He murmured to himself as he worked, his expression grave. "She's severely dehydrated and malnourished," he said finally, looking up at Lila and Jason. "Her body's been running on empty for weeks. If she hadn't found shelter tonight..." He didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. Jason's throat tightened. "Is she going to be okay?" Dr. Patel gave him a small, reassuring smile. "She's a fighter. That much is clear. With fluids, food, and rest, she has a good chance." Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "And the puppies?" "They seem fine, remarkably," Dr. Patel said, glancing at the little bundle of fur in the basket. "She must have been feeding them even when she had nothing for herself. She saved their lives, no question about it." Jason blinked back tears. He looked at the mother dog, her golden eyes now half closed as exhaustion overtook her. Even now, in her weakest state, she still turned her head to check on her puppies. "She's amazing," he whispered. Dr. Patel nodded. "She's a hero." Over the next few days, Lila and Jason worked tirelessly to nurse the little family back to health. The mother dog, whom Jason named Hope, seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. Her appetite returned slowly, and the sparkle in her eyes began to come back. The puppies thrived as well, their tiny bodies filling out as they drank warm formula and snuggled against their mother. For Jason, caring for Hope and her pups was more than just a responsibility, it was healing. He spent hours by their side, his stutter fading as he talked to them softly, sharing stories about his dog Max and how much he missed him. Hope listened intently, her head resting on his lap, as if she understood every word. Lila watched the bond grow between them with quiet joy. Jason, who had been so reserved and uncertain when they first met, was coming into his own. Hope had given him a purpose, and in return, he gave her trust. A week later, the storm was a distant memory, and the sun shone brightly over Wharton. Hope and her puppies were strong enough to venture outside for the first time. Lila's backyard, with its soft grass and shady oak tree, became their playground. Jason sat on the porch steps watching as the puppies tumbled over each other, yipping and wagging their tiny tails. Hope lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, her gaze fixed on her puppies with a quiet contentment. "You did it," Jason said softly, reaching out to scratch behind her ears. "You saved them." Hope leaned into his touch, her golden eyes shining with gratitude. The days turned into weeks, and the little family that had once been huddled beneath an abandoned truck in the middle of a raging storm now thrived in the warmth of Lila's care. The puppies grew stronger with every passing day, their tiny tails wagging furiously whenever Jason came to visit. Hope, once a skeletal shadow of herself, now moved with a quiet confidence, her golden coat gleaming in the sunlight. She had found a place where she and her pups were no longer just surviving, they were loved. Jason spent nearly every afternoon at Lila's house, helping to care for the puppies. He had fallen in love with them, each one unique in their personality, the playful one, the curious one, the timid one. But it was the runt, the smallest of them all, that captured his heart completely. The tiny black pup had been the loudest that stormy night, the one who had cried out when the world seemed ready to swallow them whole. Jason named him Shadow. And from the moment he whispered the name, the bond between them was unshakable. One Saturday morning, Jason sat in Lila's kitchen, his hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate. "I've been thinking," he said nervously, his gaze fixed on the table. I want to adopt Shadow, if that's okay." Lila's face softened, her smile warm. "I was wondering when you'd ask," she said. "He's yours, Jason. He's always been yours." Jason's heart soared. For the first time since Max's passing, he felt like his life had color again. Shadow wasn't just a dog, he was a second chance, a reminder that love could find you even when you thought you'd lost it forever. As for Hope, her story didn't end there. Word of her incredible courage spread through the town of Wharton, inspiring people to come together. A local family, the Parkers, who had been looking for a companion for their farm, stepped forward to adopt Hope and her remaining puppies. Their farm became the perfect sanctuary, a place where Hope could roam freely and watch her pups grow up in safety. The day the Parkers came to take Hope and her puppies to their new home, Jason knelt beside her one last time. Shadow was already by his side, chewing playfully on his shoelace. "You're amazing, you know that?" Jason said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved your babies. You saved me too." Hope nuzzled his hand, her golden eyes filled with the same quiet strength that had carried her through that storm. Jason knew this wasn't goodbye. It was a new beginning for both of them. Lila stood on her porch that evening, watching Jason and Shadow walk down the street together. The boy who had once seemed so unsure of himself now moved with a purpose, his face alight with hope. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the town in hues of gold and orange, Lila whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude. The storm that had once seemed so cruel had brought them all together: Jason, Hope, Shadow, and even herself. Sometimes, she thought, life has a way of using the darkest moments to light the way forward. Hope's story wasn't just about survival. It was about the power of love, resilience, and second chances. In her darkest hour, a boy found his courage, a woman rediscovered her purpose, and an entire town remembered the beauty of compassion. For those who witnessed it, Hope's story served as a reminder. No matter how fierce the storm, there is always a chance for renewal, a chance to heal. And sometimes it's the smallest voices, the tiniest cries for help, that ignite the brightest lights of hope.